Jeremy is an anthropologist and an author, and for the last 32 years he has worked to raise funds and advocating for indigenous Amazonian initiatives on the understanding that tropical rainforests is best protected by its indigenous inhabitants. He has also written several books, including The Cosmic Serpent, DNA and the Origins of Knowledge. If you haven't read it, I can highly recommend it. Intelligence in Nature, and Plant Teachers, Ayahuasca, Tobacco, and the Pursuit of Knowledge. There's much more I could say, but I'm going to leave you to it. Thank you, Jeremy. Welcome.
All right. Well, good afternoon to everybody. A real pleasure to be here in Ostke with you all. And yeah, I always start a little bit. That way you have to listen a little bit more. Well, talking about talking is what I'm going to be talking about. But I don't claim to have a monopoly on the subject, and would actually like to share the talking with you. So I'll talk a little bit, and then I'd be happy we could have an exchange or dialogue. And so if folks have questions at some point, maybe they could make them nice and short, because there's no other microphone, and then I'll repeat the question into the microphone, and then we can get some ping pong going. Is that okay? All right. Well, so I'm going to use this opportunity to try to say what I think as what's important, because with Marion we were talking about well, the ecological implications, the planetary situation right now, and psychedelics. Okay, so I thought, well, there's some thinking that needs to be done about how we think about things. And when I say we, I'm speaking in English to a Western audience. It wouldn't be the same speech in an Amazonian village, I can assure you. And so it goes like this. So I'm a Westerner. Most of the people here are Westerners. And this is a talk about Western cultures, Western languages, Western philosophies and religions, Western Weltanschauungs. And like Albert Hoffman, I always had a great respect for science. I was educated in science. I take science seriously, and it's, I think, an important and almost inevitable at this point prism through which to look at the world. I want to know about the molecules I am consuming, quite simply. And yet, the whole idea of doing science, it would seem, emerged at the end of the Renaissance and involved considering nature as something separate from humans. There is a world out there that we can objectify, that we can study all the plants, all the animals, the whole world we live in as objects, not as subjects. Well, and that is, in fact, the definition of the word nature. Nature, if you look in the dictionary, is everything that is not human. The word is defined in opposition to culture. Nature is everything that culture is not. Culture is everything that nature is not. Actually, it's the same thing with body and mind. Body is everything that the mind is not, and mind is... So these are concepts that are dichotomous concepts, but that are defined in opposition to each other. And this is a very Western signature in terms of concepts. It is, you separate to understand. And so either it is nature or it is culture. Either it is spirit or it is matter. And you have these absolute oppositions. The word analysis means in Greek to separate. So this whole approach to knowing the world based on either or, this has been, this is what led to the creation of science. The opposition between nature and culture, nature as this thing out there that we can study, led to science. And finally, when you get down to it, you say, okay, so there are cells and what's inside the cells, and you take it apart and you want to get down to the essential components, molecules, like the molecule on the roof of the building here, which I admired. And at the same time, something gets lost when you make those absolute separations. And this will be a short publicity for anthropology. There's something very precious about leaving your culture and then going to a radically different culture and getting immersed in it and even lost in it and living with people who have a completely different way of understanding the world. I had this experience. It wasn't necessarily what I was looking for. I was trying to be useful to Amazonian people back in the 1980s. That was the research subject I was doing. I wanted to show that these people used their rainforest rationally and therefore deserved the right to own their lands. They did use the rainforest rationally. They had encyclopedic knowledge about the plants in this rainforest, but they spoke of plants and animals as people, not as these kind of distant things that one could objectify. No, subjects, everybody's subjects. The whole world is full of people. They're family. No separation between humans and all the rest. The world for them is a vast assembly of beings. Well, okay, fine. And the whole idea is that psychoactive plants like ayahuasca can help you see this. That with your normal eyes, this is what Ashaninka people say in the Peruvian Amazon, with your normal eyes you look at the palm tree, you see a palm tree. But when you have your ayahuasca, when you have your tobacco, you can see the person inside. Well, this is not that there's little humans inside the plant. That's not the idea. But that the plant is a person like us, has a point of view. There's someone home. Someone home. When I heard this in 1984, which is almost 40 years ago, I thought it was just superstitious, animist, irrational stuff. You know, I didn't believe that there was someone home inside the blade of grass. I'd been educated to the contrary, in fact. So there was something difficult about taking Ashaninka knowledge about the rainforest seriously. But the difficulty was also that trying to understand what they were saying put me in front of a kind of mirror where, okay, they're saying that plants are people like us. I don't believe that that's really true. But why don't I believe that that's really true? What do I know about plants? I'm an anthropologist, a human who studies humans. Why am I so sure that there's not somebody home inside the plant? Oh, well, that's because of my education. It's not my fault, it's my education's fault. I grew up in the materialist suburbs of the 1960s. This is what my parents believed. It's what I was taught at school and all the people around me believed. Back in those days, if you believed that plants were beings like us, people would say, you're nuts, really. You really ran the risk of ridicule if you took that seriously. It was a kind of a taboo thing. Okay. The anthropological experience puts you in front of a mirror at some point. And one of those mirrors, like with neon lights, where you look and you say, ooh, that doesn't look very good. And I think that this is one thing how psychedelics may help us think ourselves out of the way, out of the mess we're in. Psychedelics can accelerate those moments where you are in front of that mirror and you're thinking about how you look at things normally. Benny Shannon wrote an interesting book on ayahuasca called The Antipodes of the Mind, and he said that perhaps the most important effect of ayahuasca was that it was as if you normally look at the world through, actually, Weltanschauung is a very, very good word, so way of looking at the world. And you're normally not conscious of it because you're looking through it. It's like a pair of glasses. As you don't look at your glasses, you look through your glasses at the world. With ayahuasca, it's as if you take your glasses off and you say, so that's how I see the world. This is not an easy experience. Actually, most people don't like to be told, or don't like even to talk about how they look at the world. What are my presuppositions? Or, if I said, okay, well, you are a bunch of Westerners, and as Westerners, let me tell you what your Weltanschauung is. People don't like to be talked to like that. Most of the time, people don't like to take their glasses off and look at them and think about how they may or may not influence their view of the world. Most of the time, people just want to look at the world and not think about all their presuppositions. That's why also when you have a psychedelic experience and you start thinking about how you look at things, it can be a difficult experience. But I think it's an important experience. I've found it important. It's true that taking ayahuasca with Ashaninka people certainly opened my eyes to things. I'll just say a few words about a few words. The word psychedelic, for example. So, revealer of psyche. Well, psyche is, let's say it's the mind. Some would translate it as soul, but that's outside of the realm of science. But scientists take seriously the idea of psyche. It's actually the idea of mind. Okay, so it's a much better word than psychotomimetic, which it replaced in the 1950s. The whole idea of the hallucinogens was that they mimicked psychosis. Well, they got rid of that word, and Humphrey Osmond, Aldous Huxley they proposed psychedelic. I've always liked the word psychedelic. I had the pleasure of spending a month with Humphrey Osmond at one point and learned the whole story behind the word. And good word. And then recently, the science of ayahuasca. Scientists started taking ayahuasca seriously, doing lab work on, and so their psychedelic science considers ayahuasca as a psychedelic. And I'm thinking, wait a second. LSD is a psychedelic, no problem. And the person who invented the molecule appreciated the word, so it's fine. But is ayahuasca a psychedelic? Well, if you ask the indigenous people of the Western Amazon, which I think you certainly should if you want to know about ayahuasca, they'll say, it's la purga, it's the purge. What it does, first and foremost, before any cinema of the mind is turned on, is this extremely bitter liquid that goes down the tubes into the guts, and it's nauseating. It's a very powerful bodily experience. And I use the word body knowing that it's in opposition to the word mind. Actually, Ashaninka people do not have a word for body, nor do they have a word for mind. The idea that there is this mind without a body and body without a mind is not part of their view of the world. If you actually want to know about their concepts of body, so when anthropologists go in and say, how do you say body in your language? It turns out that the closest you get in Ashaninka to saying body is all my skin standing. You sort of, my flesh bag. Okay. And how do you say mind? Well, finally, the word for mind, ishire, is the same word as the word for heart. So we have the skin bag and the heart. And so there is that outside, inside dichotomy. And I certainly do not mean to say that Westerners are the only ones who make dichotomies. Actually, people around the world, on the one hand, on the other, it seems that human beings are physically built to think in that kind of opposition. But Amazonian oppositions or dichotomies are much more fluid, much more permeable. So yes, all my skin standing and the heart, we can see that we're dealing with pretty concrete things. I mean, a heart is concrete, skin is concrete, and they're talking about, the person. A person, yes, you can talk about their skin bag, you can talk about their heart and what makes them go, but finally there's not this notion that there is a mind and a body, or a psyche that needs revealing. No, it's you drink down this plant and it's a purge, and they call it the purge. In Ashaninka, the word for ayahuasca is kamarampi, from kamarank, to vomit. So what Westerners now call the sacred medicine of the Amazon, actually in Ashaninka it's called the vomitive. And there's another one, sacred and profane. This is another kind of one of these separations, is that in indigenous Amazonia, there is no separation between what is profane and what is sacred. Sacred is a Latin word that means separate from. once again, we have this separation. So what is set aside from normal life? But actually, in indigenous Amazonia, tobacco and ayahuasca and nothing is set aside. The whole thing is one big, vast assembly of living beings. So the idea that calling ayahuasca psychedelic actually evacuates the body. It evacuates the first characteristic of ayahuasca, which is that it's a purge. It's interestingly enough, if you speak with Amazonian people who know ayahuasca, some will tell you that the images are almost the least important part, or distractions. And that actually where the plant works, it goes into your body, it works on places that need cleaning, and the insights that you get can also be body-based. There's not this huge emphasis on the psyche. It's almost like the plant keeps the psyche entertained whilst it's doing other things. At least that would be the Amazonian understanding of what's going on with ayahuasca. How are we doing on time?
You're good. You have 20 minutes.
Well, oh, good. That's good. Okay, just a couple more words. So when anthropologists go into the Amazon and say, so you're drinking ayahuasca, what goes on? Well, we speak with the owner of ayahuasca, the sort of invisible, the mother of ayahuasca, or the father of ayahuasca, this invisible and powerful entity that is the personality of ayahuasca. So you're talking about the spirit of ayahuasca. So when you take ayahuasca, in your visions, you see the spirit of ayahuasca, writes the Western observer. Actually, even before anthropologists, priests were writing this kind of thing. And now Westerners go down to the Amazon and talk about the mother of ayahuasca as the spirit of ayahuasca, and talk about spirituality and so forth. Problem is, spirit is a Western word. It comes from the Latin spiritus, which is the breath of God. And if you look it up, the word spirit is defined as an immaterial entity. There is a fundamental separation between spirit and matter. If it's spirit, it has no matter. And if it's matter, it's without spirit. That's the concept. Well, if you ask Ashaninka people, these entities that animate ayahuasca, tobacco, all the different, each species has its owner, these powerful, usually invisible entities, what do you call them in your language? Maninkari. Maninkari, those who are hidden. It means these are beings that you normally don't see, but that you can sometimes see by taking ayahuasca and tobacco. There is a dichotomy there between the visible and the invisible, not between the material and the immaterial. And that's not the same. So when you stroll in as the Westerner and you impose on the ayahuasca culture the word spirit with the best intentions in the world, you're actually imposing the idea of an fundamental immateriality on something that is not thought of that way. In fact, these entities that you can sometimes see, but usually don't see, and that are present in all living beings, are fundamental to all living beings. And once the maninkari leave a living being, that being is dead. These entities, as the Ashaninka and other Amazonian people conceive them, are fundamental to living beings. They're not that immaterial. In fact, they're mysterious, but no one ever said that they were fundamentally immaterial. So, going into the ayahuasca world with, I find the word spirit and the word spirituality and so forth pretty problematic. In other words, and this is not to say that, you shouldn't use the word spirit and you shouldn't use the word body, etc. No, use, please, all the words you want. We probably need more words rather than less words, new concepts. But I think that some of these concepts actually really get in the way of thinking clearly about what's going on. And here I'll get to the, probably the most important one, get back to the word nature. So when you go to the Peruvian Amazon, which has the world's most intense nature, it's the epicenter of world biodiversity. It has more species of reptiles, insects, mammals, amphibians, birds, than any other place of similar size on the planet. There's a lot of things to eat, but there's also a lot of things that can eat you. There was one television program called it The Most Dangerous Ecosystem in the World, and so forth. And it's true. You really have to know where you're putting your hand, where you're putting your foot. So it's nature with the volume turned up to 10. And people like the Ashaninka and other indigenous Amazonians have been living there for thousands of years. Sometimes people die from snake bite. Other times they lose their leg. I mean, in the village I was living in, there was one young woman and she only had one leg because when she was 8 years old, the hergon bit her and So it's not an easy place. But when you say to Ashaninka, how do you, what's your word for nature? For everything that is not human. How do y'all say that? We don't have that kind of word. No, on the contrary, we've been telling you everything is human. There's a person inside, you feel stupid after a while, but that's also what doing anthropology is about. So, okay, so there's people inside all living beings. There's no fundamental separation. So you don't have a word for nature. Okay, right. So back to the office and the books and thinking about it. Actually, anthropologists have, Amazonist anthropologists, Philippe Descola and other people, have written a lot about the concept of nature in the last 20, 30 years, simply because you come back from the Amazon scratching your head and then you've got to think about this. That this is a very Western concept, nature. And what it carries inside it is a fundamental separation between ourselves and all the rest, which I think is pretty clearly part of the problem. At the end of the Renaissance, when this idea that nature was something separate and distant from humans got instaured, and then science became possible, what also became possible was using the world without limits. If everything that is not human is just an object, hey, we can extract it, use it, consume it, wrap it up in plastic, sell it at the supermarket, plants, animals, whatever, everything, the earth, minerals, all just commodities. So this view of the world where humans in their minds extracted themselves from all the rest, the living tissue, and looked at the living tissue as just these objects, allowed science, and allowed, and science has taken us to an important and fundamental understanding of the invisible. In fact, that's what's also interesting. And here's another paradox, which is that by going down, by following science and going down into the cells and down into the DNA, that finally science has proved animism. That if you look at the DNA sequences of all the different species, there is no disagreement that it's a demonstration of the fundamental kinship we have with all the living world. There is not a single separation in sight between humans and all the rest. I mean, we're obviously mammals, but mammals, reptiles, vertebrates, invertebrates, animals, plants, all the way down to bacteria, it's all one tree of life, and all the DNA molecules in the world inside your bodies and the plant's bodies, and they're all connected by real kinship. In other words, at the beginning there was a few bacteria, and then they made copies of themselves, and then evolution happened, and here we are. And the whole tree, it is all one big DNA family, and this is what science has demonstrated. So it's almost paradoxical. The way of looking at the world that separated humans from all the rest and decided to objectify it and separate it and go down to its fundamental units, when it finally found them, DNA's structure and function discovered in 1953, and then the genomes and the genetic texts in the middle of the 1990s, what science's data reveals is a fundamental connection between all living beings. I'll just do it one more time. The beginning of science was a presupposition that there was a fundamental difference between humans and all other beings. We get to the end of genetics now, and the conclusion is the opposite. So science has shown itself to be a very powerful way of looking at the world, studying it, and reaching certain understanding. But at the same time, its birth and the presuppositions behind it are the ones that have led us to the mess we're in, where we're consuming the world much faster than we're actually eating ourselves out of existence. So this is paradoxical terrain. I'm certainly not saying that science is bad and so on, but I think that what is true is that we have a lack of concepts for thinking about how we are part of the tissue. We Westerners come out of cultures that have for centuries put ourselves on a pedestal above and outside all the rest. And it has led us to many things, including science and also the industrial world and all the pollution. It's a one big package. But we are certainly poor in concepts and words for thinking about, well, actually how we're part of this tissue. Is there 10 minutes or something?
20.
20, very good. 19 minutes. So let's see. In English, so nature, yeah, so what do? I try to avoid the word nature. You can say plants and animals, you can say all living beings, you can say the biosphere. There are alternatives. It doesn't mean that you should not use the word nature, but I do think it means that you should know that when you use the word nature, without even wanting to, you're imposing a kind of a separation between humans and all the rest, and that's part of the problem. In English, so they say, okay, well, how about the word environment? Well, the word environment comes from Old French for turning around, surrounding. And guess who's in the middle of the environment? So there is this anthropocentric tendency of Western cultures, and it's like each word is like a suitcase, and each suitcase has kind of dirty laundry in it, or historical laundry. So, you open up the suitcase. When you open up the suitcase of environment, there's human beings standing in the middle and being surrounded by all the rest. So that's not so good. Michel Serres, the French philosopher, said about 30 years ago, we should just forget that word. It's a 20th century word. Forget about it. I would tend to agree, but hey. Then ecosystem is somewhat similar. It's a kind of a 1930s word. It implies that the whole biosphere works like a machine. But in fact, machines don't evolve. So the concept of ecosystem is not only mechanical, but it evacuates what is actually there, which is evolution. Either I'm growing. So let's see. Environment. And so obviously different languages have different words. I'm for plurilinguistic, what's it called, bilingualism, plurilingualism. The more languages you speak, the more concepts you have at your disposal. German is obviously a fantastic language because you can just fuse words and invent concepts, and you have total license. I've been so busy with English, French, and Spanish in my professional life that I haven't been able to really give German the philosophical attention it deserves. I think it's not a coincidence that many of the great thinkers, philosophers, Hegel, Marx, so forth, they thought the world in German. And I think German, you can take the whole world apart and then put it back together again. At least when you read, I don't know, Marx, that's what it looks like he did. And then translating German philosophers into languages is complicated. But just saying, one word that turns out to be fairly neutral and usable and interesting if what one is trying to do is include humans back into the picture as parts of the tissue. So we're getting rid of nature, getting rid of environment, getting rid of ecosystem. And the word is milieu. The milieu. And and lieu is place, and mi means in the middle of the place. It's neutral in terms of any animal, any plant, any being can have a milieu. It's actually a word that you may have heard of the Norwegian deep ecologist Arne Næss. So he invented deep ecology in the 1950s. It turns out that Norwegian imported the word milieu into Norwegian. They spell it M-I-L-J-O, milieu, in Norwegian. And when Arne Næss wrote his book, he didn't like the word nature either. He didn't like the word environment. He thought that what one really wanted to talk about was all the world's milieus. So if we're trying to talk about the biosphere, the whole tissue surrounding the planet, all the world's milieus. Okay, I'm not saying you have to rush home and write it on the wall or anything, but I'm just saying that in different languages there are these concepts that are there and that probably deserve some consideration. And I'll just say before I give you guys the mic, metaphorically, biosphere. I think it's a good word. It says what it means. So this life, this thin layer of life that surrounds the planet like a skin on a ball. Yes, Timothy Morton, who's a philosopher and ecologist, has written that the biosphere is a hyper-object. He has his book called Hyper-Objects. And hyper-objects are things that are too big to really think about or understand. And so the biosphere, well, you think about it, okay, so I am a living being in the biosphere. I am part of the tissue. I know that this living tissue surrounds the whole planet, but I can't see it. I can't see the whole biosphere. I can't touch it. I know it's there. I know it's huge, and I'm just a small part of it. But somehow it's so big, and I'm so inside it, that I can't really grasp it. So even though biosphere, I think, exists as such, I think that if you take your spaceship and you go and you look at it, then you can see at least half of it. And you can see what's going on, and plus it spins, the whole thing spins, so that you can actually look at it, and it's beautiful, shiny, liquid, a lot of things about the biosphere. And actually, most astronauts who go up and get a glimpse of it fall in love with it. So, you know, it actually has its reality. But when you're inside it, it's difficult to see. And that's also one of the problems. That I think that if we are to be fully conscious about the world we are living in, it is essential to understand that there is a biosphere, that it has limits, for example, that you can't just keep on extracting from it, and that it's a precious thing that thrives on diversity. So reducing the diversity of living beings is not what the biosphere has in mind. Moving forward out of the mess that we've created will take having as many human beings as possible understand that there is a biosphere, that they're part of it, and that it's precious. So finding ways of allowing people to understand that there is a biosphere is an important task. Artists are welcome, everybody's welcome. Writers, poets, musicians, everybody can come and try to make the biosphere visible and understandable. But one of the problems is that we are small, and it is so big that it's out of reach. And normally to know things and have certitudes about things, it helps to be able to see them and touch them. Well, this is a hyper-object, and we're inside it. And so that's going to take some learning as well. That's where Arne Naess's All the World's Milieus comes in, is that a milieu, we're in a milieu here, it's a sort of post-industrial Basel milieu. You know, there's blades of grass growing under the train tracks and so forth. This is our post-industrial psychedelic milieu. We can touch it, we can smell it. There it is. And then, so it's like a slice of biosphere that's available. So these are some of the things I think about, and I'd be happy now to hear what you think. Monsieur, you're standing up back there. Yep.
Thanks very much for the talk. I apologize for asking an ironic question, but do the people that you spoke with in the Amazon have a word for anthropology? And I was wondering, I mean, it sounds silly, but I was wondering, you look and take an account of people that you spend time with, and you have this wonderful way of explaining it in terms of milieu or some type of critical zone or biosphere. And I was wondering, is there a sort of counter reaction that people in the Amazon also have to concepts that you may have brought, or not brought, but like, okay, simply put, is there a word for anthropologists?
That's a good question and an interesting question, and probably the best way to, I mean, the short answer is no, they don't. And anthropology is a pretty weird concept, so it's suspicious. You say, wait a second, this guy left his home and came all the way here to be with us. We don't actually even want him here, but he wants to be with us. What is his problem? Maybe they didn't want him where he came from, or maybe there was sadness in his family. He's running away from that. And actually that wasn't entirely wrong. A lot of anthropologists, myself included, were not very happy with our culture, and we're interested in other cultures for that reason. But that's just but then what's even worse, though, is that truly Ashaninka people and people in the Western Amazon have an understanding of white people as vampires. And their understanding really is that white people come from underground. That's why their skin is so pale. And then they come out of lakes and they kidnap women and children and put electrodes in their bodies and extract their body fat, which they turn into a fine oil, which they need to run their airplanes and machinery. So they are sick extractors, bent on, and they like gold as well. And Ashaninka people, so, anthropology, okay, you want to ask questions, so you're extracting, you're asking us questions all the time. Why do you do this? Why do you do that? So you're an extractor. Except, okay, it's not body fat, but it's you're to extract knowledge. You're telling us it's for our own good, but actually it's for your own good. You're going to put all that into your doctorate and become a doctor. We're not going to become doctors. We're going to stay right here. So you're extracting. What is it with these Westerners that they're always extracting? Lots of them want gold, but when you give them gold, they always want more. Why? The people would ask me this. I say, well, I don't know. That's a good question. Good question, bro. So I hope that answers your question.
Sorry for my not so good English, maybe, but okay, I tried. You came from a culture where you found out, or you maybe already felt it, that the concept of this culture, we all know this, fuck the world up, or are fucking the world up. You got to know a new culture, another culture where you said you saw, okay, they live more in tune with nature, their concepts may be better, or I attune to them more. Maybe you felt this, I heard this from your work. How do you deal with that, with this mirroring, with your encounter? I can imagine that you are in between. You can't just rationalize this, put it in a book and say, okay, they function like that, and I go back to Western culture and I'm still Mr. Narby. How do you deal with this in-betweenness? And what may be the effect? Are you or someone in this group is pushed to make the decision, okay, I get immersed in this nature culture, or stay in this think Western culture will fuck the world up, and I know it, and I look at it sorry.
Okay. Well, thank you for trying. It'll be difficult to repeat the question, but I'll do a kind of you tell me if this is a quick summary of the question. So if you're a Westerner who critical of your own culture, and then you go into this radically different culture that seems to be much more in tune with nature, and then you come back to your world, how do you deal with that friction or ambiguity? Do you go back to just being a Westerner, or do you get caught in between? And are you still Mr. Narby? I mean, that's what I heard you. So, and that's a good question, and I think anybody can ask themselves that question. There's actually a book. It's called Being Changed by Cross-Cultural Experiences, and the title of the book is very good. What's inside the book is actually not that good, So I bought the book and I thought, oh man, being changed by cross-cultural experiences. Yes, I think that, and even Claude Lévi-Strauss talked about this, is that he said the anthropologist is the astronomer of the social sciences, because you go and immerse yourself, and at the same time you try to look at things from a long way away. And then when you've done this and you come back, you are a foreigner in your own land. So actually you become a foreigner everywhere. You are an outsider. If you've done your anthropology correctly, you become an outsider in your own land. And that takes some getting used to. Funny thing is, I'm a Canadian citizen. I grew up in Switzerland after the age of 11. Then I did this field work with the Ashaninka, so forth, and came back to Switzerland when I was 27 and met Albert Hofmann in 1987. And I was thinking, okay, I'm going to become Swiss. And I started, so I don't want to be a foreigner anymore. I want to be because just if I'm going to make my life here, I want to have, and I've been living here, and I speak, and I can do the whole thing, make a fondue, so forth. And I started the first steps, and then suddenly I thought, actually, no, I don't feel Swiss. I feel like a Canadian, a foreigner in Switzerland. That's who I am. And at the age of 30, I made peace with the idea that I'm a foreigner. Wherever I go, I'm a foreigner. And even if I go back to Montreal, which is my hometown, I'm a foreigner. I mean, I don't speak French like a Québécois. And there it is. So and it's okay. It's a beautiful thing too. It's not easy at first, and maybe it's not everybody's cup of tea. And probably like most people, I wanted to belong to the team, whichever team, Team Canada, Team Switzerland, Team Ashaninka, whatever. But no, you're an anthropologist. You're an outsider. So you don't have the pleasure of belonging, but you do have the pleasure of being very free. And I think I'm not saying that everybody needs to become a foreigner or an anthropologist or an outsider, because it's not everybody's cup of tea. It's probably a minority pursuit, just like psychedelics are also a minority pursuit, just saying. I mean, we're a lot of people here today, but I mean, if you compare it to the population, the number of people who practice psychedelics is pretty small in this culture anyway. And even among the Ashaninka, it's not drinking ayahuasca is not everybody's cup of tea either. It's a difficult experience and so on. So it's okay to be in a kind of a minority. It's okay to be in the margins. They asked Jean-Luc Godard, the French filmmaker, how he felt about being a marginal filmmaker. And he replied, "It is with the margins that one holds the page." Okay? So, being an insider has its advantages. It also has its limitations. But being an outsider is the same thing. They're just actually fairly complementary. And probably if you're going to be an outsider, you need some allies on the inside. And, then you can work together. I think there's room for everybody. We need all kinds of perspectives. So there it is. Maybe one last question, or?
Yeah, do you like?
Monsieur.
How do you see viruses through the process of ayahuasca? And what's your personal opinion about their DNA and consciousness?
Okay. There's the question about viruses. My opinion as an ayahuasca drinking, biologically obsessed anthropologist. That's actually, we know it's a delicate question. But I'm not going to shy away from it. It's fairly clear that viruses mutate. They're very small. They're just small strands of DNA or even just RNA with a couple proteins around them. They're invisible. They're below the level of cannot be seen with an optical microscope. They're smaller than visible light, in other words. And there are enormous numbers of them, which gives them an advantage in terms of, so mutations occur, and then you have you have new possibilities. And viruses spring out of, or thrive rather, when certain living beings become too dense. And this can be seen with plankton. It can be seen with snakes in captivity, with monocultures of tulips, that if you get too many of the same species in close proximity, occupying all the resources, viruses that were until then unknown spring up and start reducing the numbers. That is actually, it's if you look it up, it's biologists call this kill the winner. There seems to be a biospheric mechanism where the biosphere does not like one species to become too dominant and to be dominating all the resources. So, I mean, if you take shrimp, for example, shrimp have been living, and there was no known viruses that were particularly specialized on shrimp. And then humans started cultivating shrimp and putting billions of shrimp together in tight areas. And suddenly viruses appeared that don't exist in nature and that attacked shrimp and started reducing the number of shrimp. So this is the kind of thing that goes on. And I'm not saying that this is the truth and everybody's got to sort of understand it. I think these are hypotheses. We have when I say we, the scientific world has a small understanding of viruses. But it would seem that one of the things that viruses do is act as a kind of a biospheric mechanism to stop any species, vegetal or animal, or plankton, from becoming too dominant. And it suffices that if they occupy too much of the space and they're too close together, boom, a virus is going to spring up, thrive, and cut them down. That is what I've been able to understand since when I tried to understand so it's actually fairly, if you look at 8 billion human beings, and it's not just the 8 billion individuals, is that they get on airplanes and they go all over the place, and that actually it's 8 billion animals that move around a lot, and so it's actually the density of their contacts is not only because of their numbers, but because of their frenetic movements. And so when you have enough human beings. Suddenly a virus comes, and look how fast it went from Wuhan to northern Italy, and then all easy. It's hard to stop when you have a species like us occupying so much room and moving around so much. Hey, this is the kind of thing that's going to happen. I'm not saying it's good that it happened, but yes, I think we are learning that we're in a biosphere, that it has mechanisms like this, and that actually if we don't get our acts together, this is the kind of thing that happens to us. And you know, I wouldn't want to use the word nature, but it's fairly natural. It's fairly biospheric, let's say. Okay, well, thank you very much. And thanks. So you want I don't know what's coming now.
Yes, so we continue at 5:30 here, and then, yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing you then. Enjoy the break.